Hello and welcome to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Today we are in conversation with Dr. Ambrish Mittal. He is the chairman at the Department of Endocrinology and Diabetes at the Max Healthcare Hospital. But more importantly, Doctor, today I would really like to talk to you about the ongoing COVID crisis because I've been following you on social media. I've been reading a lot of your tweets are just, basic common sense, wear the damn mask, as you say, you don't really hold back your words. And, social distancing, apart from that, also on, I want to talk to you more on the medicinal stuff. How effective are the vaccinations against antibodies? When do we see the third wave, etc.? So, first question, of course, to you is how long is our vaccination immunity going to last?
I think that's a great question, but unfortunately, no one can give you a very good answer. Going by the history of other coronaviruses and some feel that people are getting with this, it is thought that the immunity will not last forever. That's number one. And at some stage, we will require boosters. My guess is that period will be maybe 10 months, 12 months, something like that. So, but this is a guesstimate. We don't have the final answer yet. The CDC does not recommend boosters yet. However, many countries are going ahead. Britain is going ahead, for example. Thailand and UAE and many countries are going ahead with booster vaccinations in the fear or with the concern that the immunity will not last forever. The problem in this is that we don't know what is the best marker of immunity. When do you say immunity has waned? When do you really say that? That is the question. Using neutralizing antibody titers alone is probably not the only way or the best way to define if someone has immunity or not. So in practical terms, while people are not saying that, no, we want boosters simply because there is so much vaccine shortage for the first round itself, it is going to be very likely that early next year we will start requiring boosters for the healthcare workers at least.
Also, my next question is there is a view that the mRNA vaccinations are more effective, whatever the right produce more antibodies than what is available in India right now.
So it's very clear that the mRNA vaccines are a little bit more effective than the adenovirus vaccines. Now, there are ways of measuring effectiveness. We are not really talking of antibody alone. Quite clearly, the antibody generation after mRNA vaccines is remarkable. And probably more of T cell sort of immunity generation by the adenovirus vaccines. So it's hard to compare. But what we have to look at is the rates of infection, both with the native virus and the Delta virus. And there is an edge that mRNA vaccines have. Clearly, in every data, we may still try to say that all vaccines work, which is absolutely correct. But if you look at the data objectively, mRNA vaccines seem to offer little better protection than the vaccines we are currently using here.
Which brings me to the next question: is how is it fair then to say that at least post vaccination you may still get COVID, but at least your hospital stay will be less. It wouldn't be as lethal, as violent as if you don't have the vaccination, whichever one you take.
So one thing that's very clear that every vaccine that's been approved so far reduces the risk of hospitalization and deaths dramatically, very significantly. So that is the final test of a vaccine. But if we move backwards from that, a vaccine that reduces symptomatic disease the most is superior to one that does little less, right? And that's because we know that symptomatic disease, even if you're not critically ill, symptomatic disease can leave behind a lot of morbidity in terms of other issues. It's not that you just get it for 2 days and it's over. It's not like the regular flu, unfortunately. And you have all chapters now written on long COVID, and we are seeing patients with that. So we would ideally, in an ideal world, we would want vaccines to reduce the risk of symptomatic infection even more significantly than they're doing now. And if you move even further, you would want even asymptomatic infection to go down, because then those are spreaders, right? If you want to. So, I mean, there is no end to it, but the fact is that is a wish list. At the moment, we can say with confidence that all our vaccines are significantly reducing serious disease.
Now you mentioned long COVID. I want to first question is how long is long COVID? I mean, when do you say, okay, I've recovered, now I should stop checking myself? It's been 6 months, 8 months. Uh,
So, a rule of the thumb that is there is that you should have recovered by and large by 3 months. Okay. And that's because I'm talking from the start of the disease, because you will have spent possibly several weeks taking steroids, tapering steroids, all those things. So those who got it in the April burst, that April madness that we had in North India, in Delhi in particular, would now, if they are feeling lousy, it is definitely long COVID. So now again, unfortunately, we first said it should go away in 6 weeks, then 2 months, then it became 3 months, and now we know a lot of people have symptoms for 7 months, 8 months. Recent studies are indicating that if you look at fatigue and muscular symptoms, they can continue for very long. So therefore, I would still say, as a patient, if you're fine, then don't worry about it too much. The people who need to worry are the ones who have a lot of comorbidities or those who were hospitalized. So I think it may not be a bad idea at 3 months for them to undergo some kind of evaluation by the doctor, even if they don't have symptoms.
That's the question I wanted to ask, that what should you look out for when you are, some people are saying whether you're short of breath or, you walk and if you get fatigued after say half an hour, are there some self checks that we can do?
So there are two kinds of two broad groups of long COVID symptoms. One are the very serious ones. If you get chest pain or you get a stroke or clotting, that are quite rare. And they're generally happening in those who have some predilection for them. So those people will be seeing their doctor anyway and should be careful. There will be the odd one who doesn't have anything, and then you really can't do much about it if it comes like a bolt out of the blue, but that's not so common. The bulk of long COVID is people who get little breathless, some kind of breathlessness persisting. And if you have to ask me, one overriding symptom it is muscle pain and fatigue and suboptimal performance at work, not able to work long hours, brain fog, a lot of that. Peculiar kind of tiredness, which they can't even describe sometimes. Then sleep issues. It's unbelievable the number of my patients who are complaining of sleep issues. They just can't sleep well. Things like hair loss, which may seem mundane, but can be very distressing for people who are losing a lot of hair. So the challenge in this is, which of these is actually a physical impact of COVID, and which of this is actually the stress that the COVID and the environment and the overall pandemic is creating, which can lead to symptoms that mimic these. So it's very difficult to distinguish them.
Good point, actually. The more serious ones, first we heard of black fungus. Now I'm hearing of bone death. It just gets scarier and scarier. Then, what else?
No, I think I don't know what you refer to as bone death, but I think you will have issues related to prolonged steroid use. And so COVID effects some are COVID effects, as I said, some are effects of just the stress and anxiety, and some are definitely steroid effects. So when you use steroids, as endocrinologists, we are always fighting to reduce steroid usage, because we have to face the consequences. So steroid usage over a long time can give rise to significant muscle weakness, significant bone weakness, and the fact that the bones can actually, some parts of the bone can get necrosed. They can die because of lack of blood supply, a bone part of the bone.
That's also bone death, I believe. That's what the
so avascular necrosis, we call it in our parlance. But otherwise, also you can get long-term impact on the bones, weakening of bones, greater risk of fractures and muscle. So while one thing is the short-term impact, which we are now all aware of, the rise in blood sugar and so many other things, but also a long-term impact on bone and muscle is an important component of prolonged steroid use. And yes, we'll have to face those consequences.
Regarding lungs, in fact, a doctor told me that he said for after COVID recovered, you don't get your your chest scan, nothing done, because there will be some impact, some scarring for at least a year. Just don't psych yourself by getting a scan done. Does that make sense?
So I don't think there's any role at all of doing a CT scan post-COVID unless you have specific symptoms which are not responding to usual measures. So if you have specific chest-related symptoms which don't seem to respond to the usual stuff that doctors are advising, then definitely your doctor will advise. But people who are asymptomatic after COVID and have recovered well, I don't think they need to go for any tests at all. If they're feeling fine and they're okay, they should just go on with their lives, progressively increase their physical activity, progressively, increase their work hours. Only if they have a problem, they should go back for testing. Those who have underlying problems like diabetes, for example, what I deal with, so a lot of them have persistent issues with diabetes. They of course need to go back to their doctor and figure out how to manage their diabetes post-COVID.
The other thing is there are a lot of other illnesses not COVID related were given the backseat during COVID. So has that had a big domino effect on the patients? Maybe not COVID related, but now are people feeling more confident about coming out? What is your day like? Are you still doing video conferencing? Are you going to the hospital? Are things getting back to normal?
So as far as patients are concerned and as far as the hospital is concerned, things are back to normal. So all those who are waiting to come out and consult their doctors, non-COVID, as you asked, they are now all very much there. Most are there. And except those who travel for very long distance, they are still sort of delaying, but otherwise most people are there. So, and those who've gotten used to video consults want to continue video consults. So at the moment, we are doing both, like a significant number in the OPD, outpatients regular, and a significant number in the video consults, but it'll have to stabilize at some level. This is not sustainable. So I guess we will, someone like me will end up doing maybe 10, at the most 20%, probably 20% is a reasonable number, video consults, and 80% in physical consultation.
Pre-COVID, how much video consult were you doing?
Pre-COVID, I was doing video consults 1 or 2 a month.
1 or 2 a month. So that's clearly now it's something I think that is definitely going to be here to stay as our interviews like this, rather than face to face.
I think video consults are here to stay, and I think they serve a huge purpose for all my patients coming from long distance, thousands of kilometers. It's a huge convenience, and for me, a great satisfaction to be able to help them from here without them having to make the trek, and spending so much money and time on just coming to see me.
Break and come back and continue this conversation. I'm going to be asking the doctor about the third wave. Does he feel that we're already in the third? Because we have cases rising in Kerala, Maharashtra, the Northeast, or is this still the second wave that is carrying on? A technical question, but still I'd like to have an answer to that. So stay with me. We are in conversation with Dr. Ambrish Mittal. Dr. Mittal, as I was saying before the break, India still is seeing about, I think, 40,000 cases per day, which is not a small number. So is this the remnant of the second wave, or do you think we're already in the third wave? Where are we? What is happening?
I think it's a matter of semantics. It really doesn't matter. What matters is that the virus is going to be here for some time, and we need to continue to observe precautions, the basic precautions that I keep emphasizing and re-emphasizing. That's one part. Coming back to what your question is, you obviously mean a wave of the kind that we saw in April in Delhi and surrounding areas.
Is it as lethal? Will it be as?
And so something as terrible as that is highly unlikely. One can't rule out any random virus mutations and variants, but otherwise it's unlikely, because I think what will happen is that as the wave came like a blast, it was more a blast than even a wave. And it probably infected a large number of people in certain areas of India. And those areas will probably have some degree of protection against this, if it's the same variant or the previous one coming back. And they will not easily succumb to that kind of wave, at least for the next few months. So you will get small waves, small blips and small, waves all over India, different parts at different times. Northeast is not doing that great right now. So I think it's going to be number of small waves. You can call it a ripple effect. I don't know if that's the correct word here, but the fact is you will find a lot of small waves happening. So India is too big a country, And the kind of problems we had in April, May, I hope they never come back. And I think that seems to be unlikely. The key point is there are two key determinants of that. Number one is how fast we can vaccinate. If we've gotten this window right now, and if we can vaccinate a large proportion of our population, then we will probably be able to ward off the third wave to a significant degree. The second is, of course, virus behavior, which everyone claims to understand, but no one does. We do not know if the virus will mutate into a deadlier form again, or it will mutate into less deadly forms and disappear, or at least get attenuated. But if it mutates into another Delta type of thing, and which has some degree of vaccine resistance and some degree of resistance to earlier immunity, then we are in for trouble. But if we are lucky and we vaccinate people well enough, we'll probably not face that.
Is this Delta variant more deadly, or is it more amenable to vaccinations than the earlier, than the April one?
So in India and in Delhi, Bombay, the major wave that happened in April was the Delta wave, the Delta variant.
It was the Delta variant.
Yeah. So it's a Delta plus, that is the new one, but we don't know too much about that
Plus,
yet.
yeah, that's what I'm.
But the Delta variant is the one that caused it. Delta variant, clearly, our vaccines are not as effective against the Delta variant as they are against the earlier one. They're still effective, again, back to the same thing, that they're still effective against hospitalization and death, but they are not as effective against overall against the Delta variant in terms of preventing infections as they are against the original virus. And one point here important is that as vaccine science will evolve, as it is evolving, you will find that the so-called booster shots we are talking about will probably incorporate more and more of variants. So, it's a fight between the virus and our ability to develop vaccines against it. So what happens is that very likely these big companies which are chasing the Delta variant now will probably be able to have a shot next year, which will be more protective against Delta variant. So this will go on. But as I said again, if we all get vaccinated, then our chances of getting a third wave are much, much lower.
How satisfied are you with the vaccination strategy? A lot of people are complaining. You've heard all the complaints, whether it's regarding the pricing, whether it's regarding the slowness, or whether it's regarding the mentality of the people also.
So I think the vaccination program is not slow. I think the issue is really about vaccine supplies. That is the major issue. I think whatever vaccines we are able to procure or arrange or buy, we are using pretty good. We've even shown in a day that you can do much more vaccination than we are. So I think we really need to ensure greater vaccine supplies. We need to.
The problem is that in the public's, in the free vaccination, or the vaccinations are running out, but the hospitals that are stocked up still have a lot of stocks, and they don't know what to do.
They don't have a lot of stocks, but they do have, because 25% was given to private, and that was the economic model developed, because the private, at some level, the private payers will subsidize the free vaccine to some extent. I think that's the model, perhaps for the companies. So yes, of course, private players, there has been a dip in vaccination. You have to realize that the private players never have the kind of reach that government has. The kind of population that the hospitals look after is different from the kind of impact the government can have. There is no comparison. Secondly, most people, and this is the truth, in a rarefied sample of the kind that I deal with, in a metro, in a large hospital, in the private sector, most people are vaccinated. Now, we've been pushing vaccination for all our patients. And for example, today, I don't think I saw anyone who was not vaccinated. So they're just waiting for their second shot, which is now for Covishield, which is 3 months after their first one. So that part is okay. And I think private hospitals will use up their vaccine sooner or later. But yes, we just need more and more and more vaccines. As I always say, beg, borrow, whatever, but we need them as much as we can.
I would say we are living in this COVID continuous world, really, or at least in India. In some part of India, there will be a wave, or there will be some cases, because, as you said, we are a very large country. So, are you happy with the way we've unlocked? Are you, again, I saw some of your tweets about the hordes that are going to the hill stations and spreading it there.
So obviously, the government has to take a lot of things into account. It's easy for us who see one dimension sometimes to say that for our health, this is better. But the government or authorities, state or center, doesn't matter. They all have to look at a lot of things and the livelihood of people, and what some of whom are dying for want of their business or their work. So I think they will have to balance it out. Now, the thing is that one would want or expect COVID appropriate behavior from people, but I can see that worldwide, it's not just in India, people are not willing to follow guidelines, except in East Asia, where people are intrinsically disciplined and used to masking. Everywhere else in the world, in the most developed Western countries, they're having a tough time implementing COVID appropriate behavior. So it will be a challenge, one we can't give up, but quite clearly, if we are, the more careless we are, the more trouble we are likely to get into. So one is individual carelessness of the kind that people traveling, you see, you have to look at their mental health also. You have to understand that people are going nuts just sitting at home. But that is one. But there has to be an effort. Nowadays on television, I see many political meetings held in indoor environments with 20, 30 people sitting, no concept of distancing and no masking. And that's not okay. We are seeing protests. We don't want to talk about those things. But the fact is, not a single person is talking about masking there. So the virus does not distinguish your political ideology. I mean, does not make a exception for that. So quite clearly, all of us, especially leaders, have to lead by example because public follows them. And of course, we as concerned citizens, educated citizens, we have to make people aware and follow the rules ourselves.
Are you following the Covaxin controversy? Why the delay in the approval? Can you enlighten us? Because a lot of people are now messaging me, "Galti kar diya, we took Covaxin," in terms of a passport for travel.
So I think these approvals do take time. Firstly, I mean, you've had these super fast approvals just now.
These are natural. These are different times. So everything is getting fast tracked.
I think it really depends on the data that has been presented to the WHO or the CDC or wherever they've applied, and it depends on the data. And they will not compromise on the data. They will have to look at that very cautiously, convince themselves, and only then give an approval. I don't personally, and I'm no locust and I had to say that, I don't think there's any politics involved in at least the Covaxin part of it. I think it's just a matter of time before it gets approval, but they will have to examine things very carefully. They will not do it, like you can't push it through. It will take its own time. So I guess that's the way it is. We just have to wait. You have to also realize, and this is just my interpretation, as the Covaxin phase 3 was ending in March, Delta had already entered India and was rapidly becoming the dominant variant. As a result, much of the data would have also included the beginning of the Delta wave. And that may further compound the interpretation of the data. So I think all those issues would probably be discussed with the scientists, but I'm confident that the Covaxin will get its approval in due course of time. I personally don't think there's any politics involved in that.
I'll tell you one last thing. What are the lessons from the second wave of COVID in terms of medications? People are saying maybe itna steroids nahi use karna chahiye tha. Remdesivir, ivermectin, I don't know whether they're still part of the COVID protocol or not. So what are the lessons that the doctors have learned?
I think it was pretty clear by the time the second wave came which drugs work and which don't. The problem is both patients and doctors want treatment. Patients want to be treated, they want to be prescribed medication. Don't talk of those who say, no, we got too many, but most people at that time wanted medication. Start the medication, okay. And so doctors are used to prescribing medication. In the first wave, it was understandable last year because we didn't know what worked. But in the second wave, we knew a fair bit about what worked and what did not work. And I definitely think there has been over-medication in the second wave. A lot of drugs that are considered completely useless, people will swear by them and go on using them. And also, definitely, there has been overuse of steroids. We cannot deny that. And while most of the other medications that have been used are probably not going to leave behind any long-term impact, and overuse of steroids, especially if used very early, offer very, very long, as we are seeing in some people, then that could result in some long-term effects, and we'll have to deal with it as it comes. But for the future, it's very important to follow the science and be bold enough to follow the sign and be bold enough to tell your patient, which we did with many, many patients, please just use some paracetamol and monitor your, and they would call back and say, but my sister is getting like 20 medicines. I said, don't worry, but then I would say, okay, want to take supplements, you take supplements. What do you do? People are getting so anxious, but nothing else. Then I would get a call, why not ivermectin? I said, no, just hold back. It's okay. So when people are anxious and doctors are anxious and they want to save their patients at any cost, so they prescribe a little bit, I think, randomly, at least in our country. And I think that those drugs have now been shown to be not useful. So we should be very, very careful in what we prescribe.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mittal, for this conversation. It's been a pleasure talking to you and just having COVID simplified. I know it's everybody's talking about it, but we still cannot get enough information on it. It's just there and everybody's in front of everybody's mind. So thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.